Blue Reflection Second Light was the perfect game to play to conclude this summer. Game formulas like this title I find are pretty rare, which focus primarily on slice-of-life dialogue with everything else in the game pretty much being secondary. Second Light takes everything that was in the first game and increases the scope of it, and I think that's a positive and a negative, so let's get to it. The story of Second Light takes place after the events of all other forms of media of this IP. This includes the first game, the anime, and the mobile game. However, you don't need to have an understanding of prior plots to enjoy this story, as standalone, which is great because it can act as a starting point for players who are interested in learning more about the world and the characters. That being said, it feels like they just kind of took most of the popular characters from each title and manifested them into Oasis. Not that it was an issue for me, but the plot was very freeform, with the world ending and memories lost plot, which means that how each character came to be in Oasis was by pure coincidence, rather than for a specific plot point. The story itself is structured very similarly to the first game. Approximately 70% of the game and chapters are dedicated to a single girl, focusing on learning more about them and their personal struggles. This format has always been the series' strength, as each character is properly developed and sets the tone of the game to be more relaxed than, oh my god, I'm stuck in a school in the middle of the ocean. The game does bring up terminology and lore from prior Blue Reflection media, such as the Cephida and the AASA, but basic explanations that cover them can be viewed in the tips section, and to be honest, the world is already destroyed, so I mean, at this point, who cares? Speaking of the world being destroyed, I did find the overall plot to be quite shallow, being how Oasis was created to resist the world reset, but in the end it was still going to happen, and Yuzu and Lime never found a way to prevent it this entire time. The ending is also structured in a way which can be interpreted as either a melancholic series finale or a new beginning to the series, as Ao's actions effectively nullify everything that's happened in the other Blue Reflection media. I think this ending was strategic, as it makes for an open-ended transition to a completely different type of narrative in the next game, if there is a next game. That being said, it does make for a whole lot of plot holes. The big one is that someone must have sent Ao into the future. This was most likely whoever texted the Be Reborn message to her, but it couldn't have been a version of Ao in the future because Ao isn't a guardian like Yuzu and Lime who could summon reflectors, and she wasn't a reflector at this time either way. She was just an ordinary girl, so the question I have is who summoned her and how did she gain her powers? The other plot point that I didn't really understand was, since the world is going to be reset many times and we understand that Ao is going to be perpetually in this loop resetting the world so that it doesn't get destroyed, wouldn't that just make the world system aware of her meddling and then have either Ao eliminated before this happens again, or push the Ashes implementation forward before Ao can assemble the reflectors in Oasis? Unless there's of course a rule where the Cephida and the world system also forget their memories when the world is reset, but I wouldn't think so since they're kind of like the creators and arbiters of the world. However, despite myself finding the story to be mediocre, I really did enjoy the presentation. The hardscapes were all dynamic and unique, there were party dates which involved multiple girls interacting with each other, and the dialogue was much more spicier than the previous game, if you know what I'm saying. For characters, there's not much to say because you'll either know the character from their prior media or from their hardscape. One thing that this game did trade off though was the atmosphere that it had during the first game. In Blue Reflection, Hina was basically the school's therapist, going around the halls and classes stabilizing fragments. The world felt very alive with girls hanging out in every room. In Second Light, you feel the opposite. The isolation as you learn the truth of the outside world, knowing that you're the only ones left waiting for the Ash to come for you. However, this change in atmosphere did make all the characters in the game feel special. The random date spots from the first games were removed, and each of the 9 girls have 15 dates, making for a total of 135 formal hangouts. And this isn't including the team, DLC, or story hangouts which occur as the game progresses. What Second Light does well is make already established characters likable and understandable, despite already having a pre-existing story. What comes next for all our reflectors is unknown, with the ending that I was given them. but next time it would be nice if we didn't world reset all my goddamn facilities. Regarding functions in Second Light, there's a bit more variety than the first game. Requests are typically split into 3 different categories of gathering materials, defeating enemies, or stealth missions, which are very fun, I guarantee. In this title, dates are all expanded on depending on how many facilities you build, as this gives more places of interest that each girl wants to hang out at. The facilities themselves aren't that tough to construct, it's the upgrading. Thankfully, there is no achievement nor incentive to ever upgrade any facility, so you can completely ignore it as it can be pretty grindy. The fragment system is a 1-for-1 identical to the first game. Each date will have 2 different dialogue options, which will result in 1 of 2 different fragments upon completion. So naturally, if you want to collect them all, you'll have to do NG+ and choose all the alternative options. Combat is also more or less the same, with the similar real timeline combat from the first game. However, this time you have a total of 6 different girls to choose from to fight with, and instead of having supporters, you have 1 girl who provides different types of support. In my opinion, I still find the Sephira fights from the first game to be more cinematic, as each major battle felt really impactful, especially with Hina's finisher cutscenes. In this game, I didn't feel that way with any of the bosses, whether it was for a Heartscape boss or the world system. I believe I feel this way though because the game simply had a lack of cinematics. Besides the opening cutscene and the ending credits, there aren't any others, which seems strange since they had so many for the first game. But that's all I have to say about Blue Reflection's Second Light. I had a good time with this title despite my unfortunate experience of PC crashing with it every now and then. I'm very intrigued as to how Gust will approach a third game given this type of ending, but with that said, another summer has come to a close. Thank God for that, so I will see you next summer, but also tomorrow.